In the previous lessons, we've talked about file relationships and organizing files. Most components, especially fasteners, are used in multiple assemblies, so it's important to have locations for shared components. While this is efficient for storing and maintaining files, it makes it difficult to find all of the files for an assembly if you need to copy them to a new location. There are several reasons you might want to create a complete copy of an assembly. For example, if you have to work off-site, you need every file used in the assembly. Some companies create an archive of the CAD files for a project, and some customers require a copy of the CAD files for their records. While it's important to have all of the files, it's just as important to copy the folder structure. As you've seen, Inventor stores the file locations in the assembly. This means you would have to go through the file resolution process for each assembly if the file locations are different. Pack and Go is a utility that copies all files related to an assembly to a new location. Depending on what you are doing with the files, it can recreate the folder structure and update all of the file relationships, or it can copy everything to a single folder. You can specify whether you want to copy items like the libraries, or if you just want the unique components for the assembly. In this lesson, I'll walk through the process of creating a copy of an assembly to look at the different options. I'll right-click on this assembly in Windows Explorer and select Pack and Go. Pack and Go uses the project file that is currently active in Inventor. If this assembly wasn't in the workspace of the active project file, a warning dialog would display. You can click OK if you see the dialog, since you can change the project file from Pack and Go. The top field in the Pack and Go dialog shows the source file, and second one contains the destination folder. In this example, I'm copying the crank and gearbox assembly files to a USB drive so I can work on them off-site. So I'll add crank and gearbox assembly to the destination folder. At the top of the options group, you can choose between Copy to Single Path and Keep Folder Hierarchy. Keeping the folder hierarchy is the default setting, and I highly recommend it because the files will be in the proper folders instead of being dumped into just one. For the rest of the lesson, I'm going to focus on how you create the list of files to copy. The Find Referenced Files group shows the location of the project file. If the wrong project file is active, you can click on the Find button and browse to the current project. When I click Search Now, it finds one file which takes up 96 kilobytes of disk space. Since I know there's more than one file in the assembly, I'll click on the More button to look at the file list in the bottom pane. The crank and gearbox assembly is the only selected file. The other files are in the list, but they are grayed out. Let's take a look at the options. Skip Libraries is selected by default. That means it won't copy any files that are in a library location. If you take a closer look at the file paths, you can see the gearbox and universal joint files are in the Shared Components folder. The project file set the Shared Components folder as a library path, so the files were excluded. Also, the fasteners are in the Content Center folder, which is always considered a library. When I clear the Skip Libraries option and click Search Now, it shows 34 files which make up 5 megabytes of disk space. You can see in the file list that all of the files are selected. Next, I want to show a couple of options that can take up a lot of space. When I clear the Skip Styles and Skip Templates options, there are now 202 files that take up 23 megabytes of disk space. For these options, Pack and Go adds the complete design data and templates folders. As it turns out, Inventor installs 52 English and metric template files that cover 7 national standards. The design data includes all of the color and material styles, as well as the whole spreadsheets, drawing resources, as well as data for the various environments. Unfortunately, you don't get to choose what you take. Most companies create their own templates and design data locations that only contain the files that they use. In this case, I'm using the default locations, so there are a lot of extra files. Even if your company has their own templates and design data, these files still take up a lot of disk space. Since these files don't change very often, most people copy the data once, and then they can just copy the model files. Let's go back to the Options group and look at the settings in the middle. The two choices are Model Files Only and Include Linked Files. I'd like to explain what Include Linked Files does first. When you use advanced modeling techniques such as derived parts, you'll have separate files that are linked to the model files. Here are some examples to help explain when you would use one setting instead of the other. If you are using linked files for modeling, the model files update whenever there is a change in the linked file. If you copy a model file that hasn't been updated yet, then it won't be accurate. If you use include linked files, your model will update if necessary when you open it. Some companies use spreadsheets to create model configurations. If they are sending the model to a customer, they don't want to share all of their configuration data. In this case, you would use Model Files Only. Model Files Only is the default setting because it reduces the number of files and the amount of disk space. Since I don't have any linked files in my components, I don't have to change it. The last section of the dialog I'd like to show you is the Search for Referencing Files group. The default setting is to search the project file locations, but there is an option to search in a specific folder. This option isn't used very often, but it can come in handy. Let's say you have a project file that was created for a new project, but it is missing a library. Since project files are usually controlled by the CAD manager, you can't edit it to add the library path. You can add the library location as an additional search path, and then Pack and Go can find the missing files. Now I'm ready to copy the model. When I click Start, a dialog displays telling me the destination folder doesn't exist. I'll click OK, and the progress bar shows how much of the copying is complete. This is a small set of files, so it just takes a couple of seconds. But if you have hundreds of files you're copying from a server, it can take a while. I'll click Done and switch to Windows Explorer to look at the results. Inside the Crank and Gearbox folder, there's a Workspace folder, a new project file, a temporary project file that I'll just delete, and a log file. I'll expand the folders in the navigation pane so you can see it has the same folder structure as the original.